Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Insight Podcast. I am your host, Daniel Altaher, the Advanced Digital Marketing Strategist here at Sentinel Technologies. And today we'll be discussing just how to successfully navigate your cloud collaboration journey. Cloud collaboration can mean a few different things depending on who you're talking to. Often, it's centered around solutions that allow employees to work together and collaborate as a team, whether that be with file and document sharing, chat and instant messaging, or meeting tools that bring people together. The pandemic has shown just how important these tools are to organizations and their employees, as many are now working from home, either permanently or part-time. So having consistent methods to access information and communicate with others from anywhere has become more important than ever. Many organizations may be currently using or considering a cloud collaboration solution as a way to modernize their communication methods and move away from legacy solutions that often limit these capabilities. But we'll have more on that shortly. So let's dive right in and introduce my guest for today. He is Adam Bertram, the National Director of Enterprise Architecture and Innovation here at Sentinel Technologies. Adam, thank you for joining.
Good to be here.
Oh, we're glad to have you. Can you give us and our viewers just a bit about your background?
Sure. Well, I've been in the industry for give or take greater part of 20 years, 13 of which spent at Sentinel here. So started out in an engineering deployment type role, handling some pre-sales and solution architecture stuff as well, then moved into more solely pre-sales. And then probably about 7 years ago, we started to build the consulting business for Sentinel as well in our consulting group known as their advisory services team. Spent about 5-6 years in that. And then most recently here, I'm in the enterprise architecture and innovation group, which is a team that Bob Kablusik, our CTO, has founded. And really what I focus on is basically where Sentinel can innovate in our go-to-market offerings and differentiate ourselves as well as drive additional value for our customers. So that can mean new services offerings or enhancing existing offerings, as well as adding in solution sets that maybe bolster our portfolio in the marketplace.
What a role. Very cool. So let's dive right in. Adam, I gave a bit of a breakdown to start, but could you please set the stage on what is meant by cloud collaboration?
Sure. So, depending on who you ask, it can mean a lot of different things. But I tend to put it in four main kind of pillars, starting first and foremost with messaging. We're all used to instant messaging, chat. It's kind of a daily thing for us. I know I use it regularly with everybody on my team and across the organization. Next up is meetings, like what we're on today. I don't think anybody could have made it through the last 2.5 years of a pandemic without a meeting solution, right? Next up is calling. Probably doesn't get talked about that much. It's kind of the table stakes for most organizations, but calling is still part of that collaboration platform. And then lastly, I would say file and team communication or team collaboration, where you get into the file creation and sharing and how do I put security around that and how do I share it outside of my organization. So those are the kind of four pillars I talk about. And then the last piece that often gets overlooked is governance and security. Very often do I see organizations roll out these solutions without much governance around them and take for granted the inherent security just because it's in the cloud, which isn't necessarily always the case.
Very nice. So if organizations might feel like they're doing fine with a premise phone system and PBX, why do you think they would care so much about cloud collaboration? Is it just the times or?
Honestly, I hate to say it, but you can't. You these days, I don't think if you're in the IT area and that you can't ignore it. Oftentimes the business groups or say the business units, different departments within the organization are already demanding that they have that. Hey, I have to join a Zoom meeting, or my client sent me a Teams invite. How do I do that? How do I communicate after that meeting? How do I share the presentation I gave with them without having to email it all over the place and clog up everybody's inbox? So I don't think you can afford not to look at collaboration in general and more so cloud collaboration. And then ultimately, I would say, if you asked yourself, am I limiting the organization's ability to communicate? Are you tired of being in the business of running a phone system or running an on-premises-based system? And, do I want to, get to something where it's a better operational model? Are the tools I have out of date? Should I be looking at something that's more comprehensive?
There we go. So with many options out there, how would one going about choosing a cloud collaboration platform for their organization?
Yeah, I'm going to break this down into a few different things.
All right.
So I always start, those that know me and have worked with me for years, I always harp on organizational goals. That's kind of where I start first and foremost. What is driving the decision? Is it strictly a cost-based decision? Is it complexity of current tools? Are there certain integrations that you need to support? Is it the operational model? Are you tired of maintaining what you have? Is it difficult to troubleshoot? So identifying kind of what the organizational goals are going into a collaboration solution decision is probably first and foremost. It goes for without saying that that's important for every
Absolutely.
solution, but certainly with collaboration. And then I would say probably the next item that is definitely not weighted as heavily as it probably should be is culture.
Okay.
What is the culture within the organization? How do the end users operate? What challenges exist with the current collaboration tools that you have or don't have? And are there problems that could be solved by a better cloud collaboration or collaboration platform? What does adoption look like in the
Yeah.
organization? You're an end user here at Sentinel. You know
Correct.
that, if I'm not empowered as a user, I'm likely not going to adopt that tool or that suite
Hmm.
or that solution as well as I probably could. And then
Right.
that leads back into, what's the cost benefit for the organization versus how users are utilizing the tools. It's a slippery slope. So I say culture is certainly something to pay attention to. And under that, I would say shadow IT is something
Okay.
to consider as well. I'm sure there's lots that listen to this podcast realize that sometimes those decisions are made outside of IT, whether
Hmm.
they want it that way or not. If IT isn't enabling the workforce, then that workforce will typically find a way to work around it, either with
Right.
tools that they're using on an individual basis or their entire team is. And that's how organizations end up with 3 or 4 or 5 different collaboration tools in the first place. So I would say culture is certainly a big one there to pay attention to. Next up, I would say it kind of dovetails in with culture would be end users.
Okay.
The more you can understand how end users work and communicate and need to communicate, the
Yeah.
better off you're going to be identifying a platform. Because the way I communicate with my team and with others that I work with throughout Sentinel is going to be different than the way you communicate inside of the marketing team and the
I'm sure.
group and outwardly to the rest of us at Sentinel, right? So
Yes.
if I'm coming to you with a collaboration solution, I want to understand how the marketing team needs to communicate and where can I check some of those boxes off with the collaboration platform and ultimately empower you to use it, because that's going to benefit me and it's going to benefit you because it's going to drive greater adoption. So
Absolutely.
understanding those end users is a big deal. And are you empowering them or are you inhibiting them?
Right.
So key thing to consider there. And then I'll wrap up probably the last one. And again, they're the unsung heroes usually in most organizations, but the IT team, right?
Yeah.
What's the size of the current staff? Who's managing it currently? Are you a one-man show, one-woman show, or are you basically a larger team of individuals that manage the platform? That can have a big influence on what type of collaboration platform
Right.
and cloud collaboration platform you'd want to
They're having
potentially
to
undertake,
troubleshoot
right?
every little issue by themselves. It's going to be a problem.
Absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
not just the collaboration platform they usually have to manage. They got to
No,
keep servers running and any other cloud solutions
that's
running.
right.
They got to keep email going and they got to keep the desktop apps going and the office suite and all of those. So that's a big factor, right? And
Right.
what the admin burden is going to be to take on a new solution, moves, adds, and changes, training, troubleshooting. Am I looking at something that maybe a managed service might make more sense so I can kind of be more hands off and just submit a ticket to a provider that's an expert in that and then can handle a lot of that to me? That can be a big burden that they can offload to a provider like Sentinel, right? So those are probably the main things that I would say that you want to pay attention to when you're looking at a cloud collaboration platform.
And those are major factors.
Absolutely.
So if we're talking still about cloud collaboration solutions, what should I watch out for if I'm researching this and trying to get in? Are there any like pitfalls and lava or gotchas I need to watch out for if I'm diving into this?
I like the lava reference. So, yeah. So, with that, probably the one I see the most is solution sprawl. So going back to what we just mentioned about organizations having potentially some shadow IT where different groups have decided, this group might be using Zoom and this group might be using Teams, and then WebEx is everything everywhere else, and GoToMeeting and so on. I would say solution sprawl, too many tools and differing user experiences for them. And that ultimately makes things complex. It makes it confusing to users, and ultimately can cause a failure of adoption across the organization. Your users can start to lose faith that, are we going in the right direction from a collaboration tool perspective, right? So solution sprawl is definitely a pitfall to watch out for. It's a necessary evil these days, potentially, to have, two or three different platforms. And I mean, the big three, right? You got Cisco WebEx, Microsoft Teams, and Zoom meetings, right? Those are kind of the big three in the meeting space.
Dominating the market,
and it's a necessary evil, but there's ways we can make them better interoperate, and there's certainly value for looking at going with one for a cohesive, environment. And then with that, I would say, next gotcha, I already touched on it briefly, is governance and security. And this comes in certainly on the messaging side of things and the file collaboration side of things. You get into, say, a situation like you and I. We were co-authoring and working on a document here, prepping for this podcast. And with that, there's considerations that need to be made around security. Maybe we were working on something that was sensitive. Maybe it had PII, personally identifiable information,
shouldn't be accessible by everyone.
health information, right? And as we make these tools more and more simple for users to use, so it's very easy at a click of a button, I can share it externally. Well, that's great, but are we putting proper governance and security policies around that information?
That's reaching the right eyes.
I talk with so many organizations that it's not until there is an issue that they actually go and look at it. And that's not the situation you want to be in, where you've had a data loss that, you could have been prevented, right? And some of these are malicious. Some of them are typically just user error or user mistakes. We didn't put enough goalposts around the solution in order to kind of drive user behavior so they don't accidentally do it. So I would say governance and security, taking into account privacy, DLP, archival, and how that fits into your disaster recovery solution should be taken into account. Just because everything gets put up in the cloud doesn't mean it's necessarily secure inherently, and I don't have to do anything. So we take it for granted. And then lastly, I already touched on this. This is on the end user adoption side of things, training, right? Users need to be empowered. So the more that you can tailor that training, and generic training is good and it has its place for reference after they've been trained, right? But if I don't tailor it to you and maybe give you 2 or 3 examples that are common to your day-to-day workflow, you're still going to feel not too empowered on how to use the tool. Like, the basics, but it's like, oh, I didn't know I could tie it to this workflow I do 3 days out of the week or 4 days out of the week or every day, right? So that's a pitfall that I think a lot of organizations get into, is they don't focus enough on that training and that adoption. And no matter what cloud collaboration platform you're using, you can ultimately miss the mark if you don't empower those users to drive that adoption, right?
There you go. So where can people go if they'd like more assistance with starting their journey?
Sure. So, first and foremost, I would say, you can just have a conversation with us if you just want to talk about some of these topics and maybe get some insight. We deal with several of the major Magic Quadrant leaders in the industry in the cloud collaboration space. So even just having a conversation around maybe challenges you're having, you got too many solutions out there. How do I consolidate? How do I migrate from one to another? That sort of thing. And then next up, I would say, for those that want to have a more focused conversation, we do have a no-cost workshop, our cloud collaboration modernization workshop. Bit of a mouthful, but what it does is it takes about an hour to go through, and we ask a bunch of pointed questions in those major pillars that I touched on. And really what that does is, kind of focuses the conversation. We rank and compare some of the best of breed manufacturers that are in that space and can see which one maybe aligns more with what's important to you based on the question questions we've asked you. So kind of an objective way of going through things.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, I would say is our consulting engagements. I mentioned the advisory services team and our consulting organization as a whole. If you need help identifying those goals for the organization that I touched on, if you need help talking to different departments and really fleshing out, what are the feature requirements and the functionality and the workflows and the use cases, and that we definitely have formalized engagements around that
Right.
that you can certainly engage us with, and that would be kind of probably the next steps, I would say.
That's a great way to go about it. Adam, I'd like to thank you for your time, for coming on the Insight podcast and sharing with all our viewers your insightful information. As always, I am your host, Daniel Altaher, and we look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thanks, everybody.